In a quiet little neighborhood nestled on the outskirts of town, life moved at a slow and predictable pace. The streets were lined with neatly trimmed hedges, colorful flower beds, and freshly painted mailboxes that stood like soldiers guarding each home. It was the kind of place where everyone knew their neighbors, or at least thought they did, and where peace reigned supreme. But beneath the surface of this idyllic setting lurked tensions simmering just below the calm exterior. The neighborhood was governed by a homeowners association, HOA, an organization notorious for its strict rules about everything from lawn length to the color of front doors. To some residents, these guidelines ensured harmony and beauty. To others, they felt suffocating and unnecessary. At the center of enforcing these regulations was Marcus Langley, a middle-aged man who took his role as an HOA official very seriously. Some might say too seriously. Marcus wasn't a bad person. He genuinely cared about keeping the community looking picture perfect. But he had a way of coming across as overbearing. He drove around in his golf cart every evening, clipboard in hand, inspecting properties for violations. Whether it was a misplaced trash can or a tree branch hanging too low over the sidewalk, Marcus made sure no detail went unnoticed. And while most people begrudgingly complied with his requests, there were whispers behind closed doors about how far he'd go to enforce the rules. On this particular evening, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns. Marcus cruised down Birch Lane, jotting notes on his clipboard when something caught his eye. A small garden sign planted near the sidewalk at 42 Birch Lane. The sign read, "Welcome Home," in cheerful letters, accompanied by a few painted flowers. It seemed innocent enough, but according to the HOA handbook, decorative items couldn't be placed within 3 feet of the curb. This was clearly a violation. Marcus sighed heavily, shaking his head. "Why can't people follow the simplest rules?" he muttered under his breath. Determined to address the issue immediately, he parked his golf cart and approached the house. What he didn't know was that this seemingly minor infraction would lead to one of the most unforgettable nights in the neighborhood's history. As Marcus walked up the driveway, he spotted someone outside tending to potted plants. She was a tall, confident woman wearing casual clothes and a wide-brimmed hat to shield her face from the fading sunlight. Her movements were deliberate and calm, exuding an air of authority that Marcus failed to notice right away. This was Danielle Hayes, though Marcus had no idea who she really was. Danielle had recently moved into the subdivision after years of serving as the county sheriff. For her, this neighborhood represented a chance to escape the relentless stress of her job and enjoy some peace and quiet. She loved gardening and spent many evenings outdoors, nurturing her plants and watching the sunset. Little did she know that tonight, her tranquil routine would be interrupted by an unexpected visitor. "Excuse me," Marcus called out, trying to sound authoritative. Danielle turned to face him, brushing dirt off her hands. "Yes? Can I help? You?" "I'm here about your sign," Marcus said, pointing toward the offending decoration. "It's against HOA policy to have anything within 3 feet of the curb." Danielle raised an eyebrow, surprised by the sudden confrontation. "Oh, is that so? I wasn't aware of that rule." "Well, it's clearly stated in the handbook," Marcus replied curtly, consulting his clipboard. "You'll need to remove it immediately." Rather than reacting defensively, Danielle responded with curiosity. "I haven't received any notices about this before. Could we discuss it further?" But Marcus wasn't interested in discussion. His frustration mounted as Danielle questioned his approach, and he began to feel disrespected. In his mind, he was simply doing his duty, and her resistance was unacceptable. Unbeknownst to him, however, he was dealing with someone far more experienced in handling conflict than he could ever imagine. As the conversation continued, Marcus grew increasingly agitated. He saw Danielle's calm demeanor as defiance, interpreting her questions as challenges to his authority. Meanwhile, Danielle found herself amused yet puzzled by his intensity. Why was this man making such a big deal out of a tiny garden sign? She decided to remain patient, hoping to resolve the matter peacefully. But what neither of them realized was that this encounter was about to take a dramatic turn, one that would leave the entire neighborhood talking for weeks to come. The evening air was cool, carrying the faint scent of freshly cut grass and blooming flowers. The sky had turned a deep shade of orange as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the neighborhood. At 42 Birch Lane, Danielle stood calmly, her hands resting on her hips as she regarded Marcus with a mixture of curiosity and mild amusement. She had dealt with difficult people before in her line of work, but this situation felt almost surreal. Marcus, however, was far from amused. He adjusted his glasses and flipped through the pages of his clipboard, searching for the exact rule that Danielle's sign supposedly violated. "It's all right here," he said, tapping the paper emphatically. 3 feet from the curb. No exceptions. Danielle tilted her head slightly, studying him. "I understand you're just doing your job," she said in a measured tone, "but I haven't received any prior notice about this policy. Wouldn't it make sense to give residents a warning first?" Her calm response only seemed to irritate Marcus further. To him, Danielle's questions weren't requests for clarification. They were challenges to his authority. His face reddened as he shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "Everyone gets a copy of the HOA handbook when they move in," he snapped. "If you didn't read it, that's not my problem." Danielle nodded slowly, choosing her words carefully. "Fair enough. But since I'm new here, wouldn't it be reasonable to allow me some time to fix this?" Her voice remained steady, but there was an edge to it now. A subtle reminder that she wasn't someone who backed down easily. Marcus bristled at her suggestion. In his mind, rules were rules, and exceptions led to chaos. "The rules apply to everyone equally," he insisted, his voice rising slightly. "If I let you slide, I'd have to do the same for everyone else. That's not how things work around here." By now, a few neighbors had begun to peek out of their windows or step onto their porches, drawn by the sound of raised voices. Suburban disputes were rare in this community, and anything out of the ordinary tended to attract attention. Some watched silently while others whispered among themselves, speculating about what was happening. Danielle noticed the growing audience but didn't let it distract her. Instead, she took a step closer to Marcus, maintaining eye contact. "Let's try to resolve this without making a scene," she suggested, her tone firm yet diplomatic. "I'll move the sign tomorrow morning. Will that work?" But Marcus wasn't ready to back down. His frustration had reached a boiling point, fueled by what he perceived as Danielle's refusal to comply immediately. "No, it won't work," he exclaimed, throwing up his hands. "You need to take care of it now, that's the rule." At this point, Danielle's patience began to wear thin. She had spent years navigating high-pressure situations where emotions ran high, and she recognized the signs of someone spiraling out of control. Still, she tried one last time to de-escalate the situation. "Look, I'm happy to cooperate, but I don't think this is worth getting so worked up over," she said evenly. "Why don't we both take a breath and figure out a solution?" Instead of calming him, her words seemed to enrage Marcus even more. He glared at her, his jaw tightening. "You're not taking this seriously," he accused. "Maybe I should call the police to deal with you." Danielle blinked, momentarily stunned by the absurdity of the statement. "The police?" she repeated, her lips curving into a faint smile despite herself. "That seems like a bit of an overreaction for a garden sign, don't you think?" Unaware of the irony of his threat, Marcus stormed back to his golf cart, muttering under his breath. Danielle watched him go, shaking her head slightly. She couldn't believe how quickly the situation had escalated over something so trivial. As far as she was concerned, the matter could have been resolved with a simple conversation. But Marcus clearly had other ideas. Moments later, he returned, holding something that made Danielle freeze in place. A handgun. He gripped it tightly, pointing it in her general direction as if to emphasize the seriousness of his demands. "I'm done talking," he declared, his voice trembling with anger. "Fix the sign. Now." For a split second, Danielle felt a surge of disbelief. Was this really happening? Here she was, a decorated sheriff with decades of experience handling firearms and defusing dangerous situations, being threatened by a man wielding a weapon over a minor infraction. It was almost laughable, if it weren't so serious. Her training kicked in instantly. Danielle raised her hands slightly, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. "Sir, please lower your weapon," she said, her voice calm but commanding. "This isn't necessary." Marcus hesitated, his grip on the gun wavering. For the first time, doubt flickered across his face. "Don't tell me what to do," he shot back, though his confidence seemed to waver. Danielle took a deep breath, choosing her next words carefully. "I'm Sheriff Hayes," she announced, her voice steady and authoritative. "And I assure you, escalating this situation isn't going to end well for anyone." The revelation hit Marcus like a freight train. His eyes widened as the pieces clicked into place. The confident woman standing in front of him, the one he'd been yelling at for the past 10 minutes, wasn't just another homeowner. She was the county sheriff. And suddenly, the gravity of his actions came crashing down on him. Neighbors who had been watching from a distance gasped audibly, some covering their mouths in shock. A few instinctively reached for their phones, dialing 911 to report what they were witnessing. The peaceful evening had transformed into something straight out of a movie, and no one could quite believe what was unfolding before their eyes. As the moments ticked by, tension hung thick in the air. Danielle stood her ground, her composure unshaken despite the absurdity of the situation. Marcus, on the other hand, looked increasingly panicked, realizing too late that he had crossed a line he couldn't uncross. What had started as a minor disagreement over a garden sign had spiraled into a confrontation that would leave lasting ripples throughout the neighborhood and change the way everyone viewed their quiet little corner of suburbia forever. The moment Danielle identified herself as Sheriff Hayes, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. The once calm and orderly evening now felt charged with tension, as if the air itself had grown heavier. Marcus stood frozen, his arms still extended, clutching the handgun that suddenly seemed far too large for his grip. His face turned pale and beads of sweat began forming on his forehead. For a man who prided himself on order and control, he was now completely out of his depth. Danielle, however, remained unflappable. Years of training and experience had taught her how to handle volatile situations without letting emotions take over. She kept her hands slightly raised, not in surrender but as a gesture of reassurance. Her voice was steady, almost soothing, despite the absurdity of the situation. "Sir, I need you to lower your weapon," she repeated, her tone firm, yet measured. "This doesn't have to go any further." But Marcus wasn't listening, or perhaps he couldn't. Panic had taken hold of him, clouding his judgment. Instead of complying, he tightened his grip on the gun, his knuckles turning white. His breathing grew rapid and shallow, and his eyes darted around frantically as though searching for an escape route. You're bluffing," he stammered, though there was no conviction in his words. Danielle shook her head slowly, maintaining eye contact. "I assure you I'm not," she said. "If you check my credentials, you'll see I'm telling the truth. But right now what matters is that we resolve this safely, for both of us." Her calm demeanor only seemed to unsettle Marcus further. In his mind, the tables had turned so abruptly that he couldn't process it. Just moments ago, he had been the one issuing demands, certain of his authority. Now he found himself facing off against someone whose very presence commanded respect, and who happened to be armed with far more than just confidence. From across the street, neighbors watched in stunned silence. Some peered through curtains, while others stood nervously on their porches, unsure of what to do. A few whispered urgently into their phones, calling 911 to report the unfolding drama. One elderly woman clutched her chest, murmuring prayers under her breath, while a teenage boy filmed the scene discreetly with his phone, capturing every tense second. As the standoff dragged on, Danielle continued speaking in a low, steady voice. "Marcus," she said, deliberately using his name to humanize the interaction. "You're upset about a sign, I get that. But pointing a gun at someone, anyone, is never the answer. Let's put the weapon down and talk this through like reasonable people." For a brief moment, it seemed as though her words might break through. Marcus's hand wavered slightly, and his shoulders slumped as if the weight of his actions was finally sinking in. But then, panic surged back, and he straightened up again, his expression wild. "No," he shouted, his voice cracking. "You don't understand. You're breaking the rules." Danielle sighed inwardly. recognizing the signs of someone spiraling deeper into denial. She knew from experience that reasoning with someone in such a state required patience, not force. "Marcus," she said gently, "rules are important, but they're meant to serve people, not harm them. What you're doing right now isn't about the HOA or the sign anymore. It's about choices, and the choice you make next will matter, a lot." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Marcus blinked rapidly, his gaze flickering between Danielle and the gun in his hand. He looked torn, caught between fear and disbelief. On one side, there was the realization that he had made a catastrophic mistake. On the other, the instinct to double down and defend his actions, no matter how misguided. Meanwhile, the growing crowd of onlookers added another layer of pressure. Neighbors exchanged worried glances, whispering among themselves. "What is he thinking?" one man muttered. "He's going to get himself arrested. Or worse." Another neighbor stepped forward hesitantly, raising her hands in a placating gesture. "Marcus, please," she called out softly. "Just put the gun down, we can sort this out later." Her intervention seemed to rattle him even more. Marcus whipped his head around, glaring at the gathering crowd. "Stay out of this," he barked, his voice shaking. "This has nothing to do with any of you." Danielle seized the opportunity to regain his focus. "Marcus," she said firmly, drawing his attention back to her. "Look at me. Right now, it's just you and me. No one else matters. What happens next depends on the decision you make. Do you really want to let this escalate further?" Her question struck a nerve. Marcus swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly. For the first time since pulling out the gun, he appeared to genuinely consider his options. The weapon dipped slightly, though it remained pointed in Danielle's general direction. His breathing slowed, and his posture relaxed by a fraction. It was a small victory, but Danielle knew better than to push too hard too quickly. In the background, the distant sound of sirens began to pierce the evening air. Someone's 911 call had reached the local authorities and help was on the way. Danielle heard the sirens too, but she didn't acknowledge them. Her focus remained entirely on Marcus, determined to keep him calm until the situation could be resolved safely. "You're not a bad person, Marcus," she said quietly, her voice carrying a note of empathy. Whoever originated from. As the distant wail of sirens grew louder, slicing through the tense evening air, Danielle maintained her steady gaze on Marcus. Her voice remained calm, almost conversational, as if she were speaking to a colleague rather than someone holding a weapon. "Marcus," she said softly, "you've got two choices here. You can keep going down this road or you can choose to walk away from it. Trust me when I say that walking away is the better option, for everyone." Marcus's grip on the gun loosened slightly, though his knuckles were still white. His eyes darted toward the approaching sound of the sirens, and for the first time, he seemed to fully grasp the gravity of the situation. The realization hit him like a freight train. This wasn't just about a garden sign anymore. This was about something far bigger and far more dangerous. The neighbors, now gathered in small clusters along the sidewalk, exchanged nervous glances. Some had their phones out, recording the scene, while others whispered prayers or pleaded with Marcus to put the gun down. One brave woman stepped forward again, her hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Marcus, please," she urged, her voice trembling. "Think about what you're doing. No one wants anyone to get hurt." Her words seemed to pierce through Marcus's haze of panic, but they also made him defensive. He turned his head sharply toward the crowd, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "This isn't your business," he shouted, his voice cracking under the strain. "Stay back." Danielle seized the moment to refocus his attention. "Marcus," she called out firmly, snapping his gaze back to her. "Listen to me. These people care about you. They're worried because they don't want to see you make a mistake you'll regret later. But right now the only person who can fix this is you." Her tone carried a quiet authority that resonated deeply. It was clear she wasn't trying to shame him or corner him into submission. Instead, she was offering him a lifeline, a chance. to step back from the edge before things spiraled further out of control. For a fleeting moment, Marcus looked as though he might take it. The gun dipped lower and his shoulders sagged slightly, as if the weight of the world had finally settled onto them. But then, fear took over once more. The sirens were closer now, loud enough to drown out the chirping of crickets and the rustling of leaves in the gentle evening breeze. Red and blue lights flashed at the end of the street, illuminating the neatly trimmed hedges and pristine driveways. 2 police cruisers screeched to a halt near Marcus's golf cart, followed by a third vehicle moments later. Officers poured out of the cars, their hands resting on their holstered weapons as they assessed the scene. "Sheriff Hayes," one of the deputies called out, relief evident in his voice. "Are you okay?" Danielle nodded without breaking eye contact with Marcus. "I'm fine," she replied evenly, "but we need to de-escalate this situation carefully." The officers moved cautiously, forming a loose perimeter around the driveway where Marcus stood. Their presence added another layer of pressure, but Danielle knew it was necessary. She also knew that the last thing Marcus needed right now was multiple voices shouting commands or overwhelming him with authority. So she continued to act as the intermediary, keeping her focus squarely on him. "Marcus," she said gently, "the officers are here to help. They're not here to punish you, not unless you give them a reason to. Right now, all you need to do is lower the gun. That's it. Just one simple action, and we can move forward from here." Her words hung in the air, punctuated by the hum of the police radios and the occasional murmur from the crowd. Marcus's breathing was shallow and uneven, and sweat dripped down his temples. He glanced nervously between Danielle and the officers, clearly torn between surrendering and doubling down on his defiance. One of the deputies stepped forward slowly, his hands held up in a non-threatening manner. "Sir," he said calmly, "we're here to make sure everyone stays safe. Please, let's resolve this peacefully. Put the gun down and we can talk." For a long, agonizing moment, Marcus hesitated. The gun wavered in his hand, tilting downward slightly before rising again. It was as if he couldn't decide whether to follow his instincts or give in to the mounting pressure. Danielle didn't push him further. Instead, she gave him space to process everything happening around him. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Marcus's resolve cracked. With a shaky exhale, he lowered the gun completely and placed it on the ground. His hands trembled as he raised them above his head, signaling his surrender. A collective sigh of relief rippled through the crowd, followed by murmurs of gratitude and disbelief. The deputies moved in swiftly but carefully, securing the weapon and guiding Marcus away from the scene. As they led him to one of the patrol cars, his face was a mixture of shame, confusion, and exhaustion. Neighbors watched silently as the man who had once prided himself on enforcing rules was now being escorted away in handcuffs. Danielle stayed where she was, taking a deep breath as the adrenaline began to ebb. She ran a hand over her face, brushing away the tension that had built up during the confrontation. Despite the absurdity of the situation, she felt a pang of sympathy for Marcus. She knew how easy it was to let emotions cloud judgment, especially when pride and fear collided. Still, there was no excuse for pointing a firearm at another person, no matter the circumstances. As the officers finished processing the scene, several neighbors approached Danielle, their expressions a mix of concern and admiration. "Are you really okay?" one woman asked, her voice filled with genuine worry. "That was unbelievable." Danielle managed a small smile, nodding reassuringly. "I'm fine," she said. "Thank you all for stepping in when you did. It helped more than you know." Another neighbor, a middle-aged man with a baseball cap, shook his head in disbelief. "I can't believe Marcus would do something like this," he muttered. "He's always been so strict about the rules, but I never thought he'd go this far." Danielle nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes people get caught up in their own version of right and wrong," she said. "They lose sight of the bigger picture. Tonight showed us how quickly things can spiral out of control when emotions take over." The conversation shifted as the reality of the situation sank in. Neighbors who had previously admired Marcus's dedication to the HOA now saw him in a different light. Others expressed gratitude toward Danielle, thanking her for staying calm and preventing the incident from escalating further. "I don't know how you kept your cool like that," one young mother admitted, clutching her child's hand tightly. "If it were me, I would have panicked." Danielle chuckled softly, though there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. "It's my job to stay calm in tough situations," she explained. "But trust me, even I was surprised by how tonight unfolded." As the crowd began to disperse, Danielle lingered for a moment, gazing at the spot where the confrontation had taken place. The cheerful garden sign still stood near the curb, its bright colors glowing faintly in the dim light. In a way, it symbolized the absurdity of the entire ordeal, a tiny decoration that had somehow become the catalyst for chaos. With a final glance at the scene, Danielle turned and headed back toward her house. The evening had been far longer and more eventful than she'd anticipated, but she knew it wasn't over yet. Tomorrow, the neighborhood and perhaps the entire town would be buzzing with talk of what had happened. And while Danielle wanted nothing more than to leave the drama behind, she also recognized the importance of addressing the underlying issues that had led to this moment. For now, though, she simply wanted to close her front door, pour herself a cup of tea, and reflect on the strange turn her peaceful evening had taken. Outside, the flashing lights of the police cruisers faded into the distance, leaving the subdivision eerily quiet once again. But beneath the surface, the ripple effects of the night's events were just beginning to spread. The next morning, the quiet neighborhood of Birch Lane buzzed with a mix of shock, disbelief, and whispered conversations. The events of the previous evening had spread like wildfire, fueled by neighbors recounting what they'd witnessed and snippets of footage captured on phones. By sunrise, the story had reached beyond the subdivision, making its way onto local news channels and social media platforms. For many residents, it was hard to reconcile the man they thought they knew, Marcus Langley, the meticulous HOA official, with the image of someone pointing a gun over a garden sign. Danielle Hayes woke up early, as she always did. But this time, the calm routine of her morning felt different. She sipped her coffee while staring out the window at the now infamous sign that had sparked the entire ordeal. It stood innocently in the soft morning light, its cheerful message of, "Welcome, home," almost mocking in its simplicity. Despite the absurdity of the situation, Danielle couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. She understood that Marcus's actions weren't just about rules or pride. They were rooted in something deeper: insecurity, fear, and perhaps a need for control in a world where so much felt uncertain. As she stepped outside to tend to her plants, Danielle noticed several neighbors approaching hesitantly. Some brought baked goods, a pie here, a plate of cookies there, while others simply wanted to express their gratitude. "We're so sorry this happened," one older woman said, clutching a foil-wrapped dish. "You didn't deserve any of this." Danielle smiled warmly, accepting the gesture. "Thank you," she replied. "But let's not forget we're all human. We all make mistakes. What matters is how we learn from them." Her words resonated with many, though not everyone agreed. Across the street, a heated debate unfolded between two neighbors who had differing opinions about Marcus's behavior. One argued that he should be forgiven, citing his history of dedication to the community. The other countered that his actions were inexcusable, regardless of intent. Similar discussions echoed throughout the neighborhood, dividing residents into camps of empathy and indignation. Meanwhile, the legal fallout began to take shape. Marcus was formally charged with aggravated assault and brandishing a firearm unlawfully. His mugshot appeared on local news websites, showing a man who looked defeated, his usual stern expression replaced by one of exhaustion and regret. Friends and acquaintances struggled to reconcile the image with the person they thought they knew. At an emergency HOA meeting held later that day, members unanimously voted to remove Marcus from his position, citing concerns about safety and trust. For Marcus, the consequences extended far beyond legal troubles. His reputation, once built on authority and diligence, lay in ruins. He became a pariah within the very community he had worked tirelessly to maintain. Neighbors avoided eye contact when passing him, and some even began circulating petitions to prevent him from returning to the neighborhood altogether. It was a stark reminder of how quickly public perception could shift, and how fragile personal legacies truly were. In contrast, Danielle found herself thrust into the spotlight in ways she hadn't anticipated. Reporters camped outside her home, eager to hear her side of the story. Social media users hailed her as a hero, praising her composure and professionalism during such a bizarre encounter. While Danielle appreciated the support, she also felt uneasy about being celebrated for enduring something so unnecessary. "This shouldn't have happened in the first place," she told a reporter during a brief interview. "It's a reflection of bigger issues, how we communicate, how we handle conflict, and how quick we are to escalate situations instead of resolving them peacefully." Her comments struck a chord, sparking broader conversations about accountability, implicit bias, and the misuse of power. Many pointed out the irony of the situation: a black woman, a sheriff no less, being threatened by a white man, enforcing arbitrary rules designed to maintain order. Critics argued that Marcus's reaction might have been influenced by unconscious biases, suggesting that if Danielle had been a different race or gender, the confrontation may have unfolded differently. Others focused on the culture of entitlement, perpetuated by organizations like the HOA, questioning whether strict regulations bred hostility rather than harmony. Back in the neighborhood, efforts were underway to address these underlying tensions. A group of residents organized a town hall meeting to discuss what had happened and explore ways to prevent similar incidents in the future. Danielle attended, sitting quietly at the back of the room as people shared their thoughts and feelings. Some spoke passionately about the need for compassion and understanding, while others admitted feeling intimidated by the HOA's rigid enforcement policies. One neighbor, a young mother named Lisa, stood up and addressed the crowd. "I moved here because I wanted a safe, welcoming place to raise my kids," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But last night made me realize that safety isn't just about locked doors and alarm systems. It's about how we treat each other. If we can't resolve disagreements without resorting to threats, or worse, we're failing as a community." Her words earned nods of agreement, and the meeting concluded with a commitment to implement changes. The HOA agreed to revise its policies, placing greater emphasis on communication and conflict resolution. Mandatory training sessions would be introduced for all members, focusing on de-escalation techniques and cultural sensitivity. Additionally, a new committee was formed to review existing rules, ensuring they promoted inclusivity rather than division. Danielle left the meeting feeling cautiously optimistic. While she knew that true change wouldn't happen overnight, she believed the neighborhood was taking important steps toward healing. As she walked home, she noticed subtle signs of progress: a neighbor helping another carry groceries, children playing together in a front yard, and a fresh coat of paint brightening a once dull fence. These small acts of kindness reminded her why she had chosen this community in the first place. That evening, Danielle sat on her porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The events of the past 24 hours weighed heavily on her mind, but she refused to let bitterness take root. Instead, she chose to focus on the lessons learned, not just by herself, but by everyone involved. Conflict, she realized, wasn't inherently bad. It was how people responded to it that mattered most. And sometimes, even the most unlikely encounters could lead to growth, reflection, and a renewed sense of purpose. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Danielle leaned back in her chair, letting the cool breeze wash over her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, she allowed herself a moment of peace. After all, life in the suburbs was unpredictable, and that unpredictability, she decided, was part of what made it worth living. Weeks turned into months, and life in the Birch Lane neighborhood began to settle into a new rhythm. The initial shock of the incident had faded, but its impact lingered like the faint scent of rain after a storm. Conversations that once revolved around trivial HOA rules now centered on deeper topics: communication, empathy, and the importance of treating others with respect. For many residents, The confrontation between Marcus Langley and Sheriff Danielle Hayes had become a turning point, a moment that forced them to reflect on their values and priorities. Danielle remained a central figure in the community, though she preferred to stay out of the spotlight. Her decision to continue living in the subdivision surprised some people, who assumed she would move elsewhere after such an unsettling experience. But Danielle saw no reason to let one man's actions define her perception of the neighborhood. She loved her home, the cozy porch, the vibrant garden, and the quiet evenings spent watching fireflies dance in the twilight. More importantly, she believed in giving people a chance to grow and change. Her presence served as a reminder of resilience and grace under pressure. Neighbors often sought her advice, not just about disputes, but also about fostering stronger relationships within the community. Danielle welcomed these conversations, offering thoughtful insights without ever imposing her views. "We're all learning," she would say, with a warm smile. "And every day is an opportunity to do better." For Marcus, however, life had taken a darker turn. The legal proceedings against him dragged on, casting a shadow over his days. He pleaded guilty to the charges of aggravated assault and unlawful use of a firearm, receiving probation and mandatory anger management classes. While some viewed his sentence as lenient, others felt it was fair given his lack of prior offenses. Regardless, the damage to his reputation was irreversible. Friends distanced themselves, and former allies within the HOA refused to associate with him publicly. Despite everything, Marcus tried to rebuild his life. He sold his house quietly and moved to a smaller apartment on the outskirts of town, far from the prying eyes of those who knew him. Occasionally, he attended support groups for individuals struggling with anger issues, where he spoke candidly about the night that changed everything. "I thought I was protecting my community," he admitted during one session, his voice heavy with regret. "Instead, I destroyed it, and almost destroyed myself." His words resonated with others in the group, sparking discussions about accountability and redemption. While forgiveness didn't come easily, especially from those who had witnessed his actions firsthand, Marcus hoped that time would soften hearts. In the meantime, he focused on personal growth, determined to prove that people could change if given the chance. Back in the neighborhood, the HOA implemented sweeping reforms aimed at preventing similar incidents in the future. Rules were rewritten to emphasize collaboration over enforcement, and monthly meetings became forums for open dialogue rather than rigid lectures. A mediation program was introduced, allowing neighbors to resolve conflicts through neutral third parties instead of relying solely on official intervention. These changes weren't perfect, but they marked a significant shift toward a more compassionate approach to community living. The transformation extended beyond policies. Residents began prioritizing connection over conformity, organizing potluck, dinners, book clubs, and volunteer projects to strengthen bonds. Children played freely in cul-de-sacs, their laughter echoing through the streets, while adults exchanged stories over coffee or weekend barbecues. The atmosphere felt lighter, less stifling, as if the weight of unspoken tensions had finally lifted. One evening, several months after the incident, the neighborhood gathered for a welcome home event at the local park. Organized by Lisa, the young mother who had spoken so passionately at the town hall meeting, the gathering aimed to celebrate unity and renewal. Tables were laden with homemade dishes, colorful streamers fluttered in the breeze, and music played softly in the background. It was a modest affair, but the sense of camaraderie was palpable. Danielle arrived late, having worked a long shift at the county sheriff's office. She hesitated briefly at the entrance, unsure of how she'd be received. But any doubts vanished when Lisa spotted her and waved enthusiastically. "Sheriff Hayes," she called out, rushing over to greet her. "We're so glad you're here." Danielle smiled, touched by the warmth of the welcome. As she mingled with her neighbors, she noticed something remarkable. People seemed genuinely happy to see her. There were hugs, handshakes, and heartfelt expressions of gratitude. One elderly couple even presented her with a framed photo of the garden sign that had started it all, inscribed with the words, "A symbol of strength and unity." "I don't know what to say," Danielle admitted, laughing softly as she accepted the gift. "This is unexpected." "It's our way of saying thank you," the woman replied, patting her arm affectionately. "You reminded us of what really matters." As the evening wore on, Danielle found herself reflecting on how far the neighborhood had come. What had begun as a tense standoff over a minor infraction had evolved into a catalyst for meaningful change. People had learned to listen to one another, to prioritize understanding over judgment, and to embrace imperfections as part of being human. It wasn't a perfect solution, no community ever was, but it was progress. When the festivities wound down and the crowd began to disperse, Danielle lingered for a moment, gazing at the twinkling string lights strung between trees. The park buzzed with the hum of crickets and distant laughter, a soothing soundtrack to the night. She thought about the journey that had brought everyone here, the mistakes, the lessons, and the triumphs, and felt a deep sense of hope. On her walk home, Danielle paused at the edge of her driveway, looking back at the sign that still stood proudly near the curb. Its cheerful message seemed fitting now, a testament to resilience and renewal. For all its simplicity, it carried a powerful reminder that even in moments of conflict there was always room for growth, understanding, and second chances. As she stepped inside and closed the door behind her, Danielle allowed herself a small smile. Life in the suburbs might never be entirely predictable, but perhaps that unpredictability was its greatest gift. After all, it was in those unexpected moments, the challenges, the surprises, and the triumphs, that true connections were forged, and for Danielle that made every day worth embracing.